pole you have there, right? That's a cool.
Yep.
Oh, amazing.
He's trying to
I'm
come
in
over.
Devon technically now. I don't live there anymore, but I'm like 15 minutes down, closer to Villanova.
Okay, got it. Nice.
I guess so.
Did you get YouTube? You got YouTube. Did you get
Oh,
this one as well? Zoom, Stefan?
I did. There you
Got
go.
it.
Both are on right now.
somebody else, Marie. So I'll just hit when I see it. I'll just hit admit
So
anyone that
what
comes
we'll
in.
do, Jared, is Patty and I, oh, y'all don't have to worry about anything. Patty's Hawkeye when she sees admittance. So we'll take care of that.
Yes,
And
we'll take care of that. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, let's go ahead and move forward. We are here to talk about intellectual property and all things concerned and other things as well. We really need to know about that. I've heard so many of these presentations and I'm still not in order. But after this, I'm going to get my house in order with all of these things. But we are here today getting toward the evening of the National Black AI Literacy Day. We started this back in June. We did an entire week and we met so many experts in the AI field. Stefan decided that he wanted to bring us together every quarter. So this is our quarterly meeting. We've had a wonderful day ever since 9 this morning. And so we're going into our next session and Stefan's going to tell you who's here and we won't belabor the time. We'll get started right away. Thank you,
all right.
Stefan.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. Y'all, this is great. I can't tell you how powerful this subject is of AI and how powerful the foundation of ethics, the legal part of that, law, our rights, what might be human, what might not be, what we can protect, what we can't protect. That's what we'll talk about. We have two great lawyers with us tonight. And little promotion here. Aigné is my attorney and has done some extraordinary things with trademark and IP with me, an incredible counsel. And Jared, I know I've heard what he's doing actually with cases and working for our rights. And Jared, it's great to have both of you all. So y'all listen up. We sort of jump right into it. Know that this is being recorded right now on YouTube as well as here. We'll bring up some parts. Aigné, I'll have you start first and then Jared. And hey, if some wild things about where we're going with AI comes up, let's just see what we can do, what we know and don't know with it. Aigné, I'm gonna hand it off to you. It's great having you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stefan. Always a pleasure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Aigné Goldsby Wells. I'm the founder of Goldsby Law P LLC. This topic, I think, is just really telling, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with Jared to see also sort of what he contributes to this conversation. One of the things that I talked about when we did the Black Literacy AI Week was sort of data and data dignity and how it sort of impacts the Black community. And I think one of the things that came up several times actually throughout some of those presentations was sort of this idea of bias in the AI field and how that impacts the Black community. So I may touch on a little bit of that today, but my focus as an attorney, as I share my screen, is really focusing on legacy. And so that's the perspective that I want to focus on in my short segment today is legacy. So the work that I do as an attorney, as a legacy lawyer, is helping families and businesses truly just protect their legacy. I want to help them build their legacy, but also protect it. And most of my work is in the space of estate planning and business law. I also have a practice focused on juvenile and education law. And so I look at my work as a whole as focused on the family. There is a lot that we have to do in terms of changing the way that we live our lives from one generation to the next. And one of the ways to do that is by focusing on legacy itself. So that's most of what I do. I did want to kind of hear from you all in the chat, or if anyone wants to come off of mute. When you hear the word legacy, what does that mean to you? I know I have a definition for legacy, and I know what the dictionary says legacy is, which we will go over, but I'm curious to all of you what the word legacy means. And so, Patty, if you see anything in the chat, I'm going to try to pull it up as well. But if anybody wants to come off of mute or put something in the chat, let's just sort of engage and hear sort of what it is that you think of when you think of the word legacy.
Aigné, is it sort of what we leave for the people after us?
That's a great way to think about legacy. I like that definition. Does anybody have anything additional that they think of when they hear the word legacy?
I would say what we leave and how do we make sure we leave what we're intending to leave. Doing it the right way and working, having people on our team that can make sure that it's actually getting done and not just going to your favorite AI and asking, you hear this all the time, right? How do we do a will? And it's great. It just spits it out. But I don't think that's the last step, and it might not survive if it gets challenged. And that's where you would come in, it sounds like. That's great. I saw your website. It looks amazing. And you do a lot of coursework on this also in training. So it's great to see you're blending it with AI in the conversation. For sure.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that because I think that there's a lot of points that you mentioned. So hopefully we'll get a chance to cover some of that. I see someone says that legacy is not necessarily material bound as well, which I think is a very good point. So my perspective, I'm also very spiritual, and Stefan knows this. So I also go by the anointed attorney. And one of my favorite Bible verses that's on my website as well is Proverbs 13:22. And part of that verse talks about how a good man or a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. So when I think of legacy, I'm thinking about the next generation, not just about what we can do for ourselves right now. We have to think about what's coming next. And particularly in the context of AI, I actually think this is a very important topic because AI is now moving a lot faster. There are things that we can do that we couldn't do years ago. There are ways where we can integrate the technology that we have in, right before us, and then use that to help the next generation. We have a lot more things at our disposal that our ancestors did not have. So that's one thing that I think about. Generally, though, the idea of legacy, when I think of it, and this is what the dictionary talks about, you're right. It's basically you are having something of value, something that's usually associated with property or money, and then that is being passed down. In the context of a will is the way that the dictionary describes it, but truly it can be anything of value. So I often talk about legacy in the form of education, legacy in the form of wisdom and knowledge. You can pass that down to your children. And so when you learn something, when you come to an event like this and you're getting information that's going to be beneficial to you, share it. Don't just keep it to yourself. It's very important that you share the knowledge and the information that you have with your friends, your families, and your loved ones so that it can be passed down. Another word that's very closely associated with the word legacy is inheritance. And so I'm actually working on my new book that will be coming shortly, talking about your spiritual legacy and spiritual inheritance. But one of the things when you think about the word inheritance and legacy, they work well together, but it's about coming into possession of something that you actually have a right to receive. And so they're not the exact same thing, but they're very closely connected because you have to actually step into possession. You have to actually take ownership of that thing. And so that's one aspect that I counsel my clients on, particularly in the estate planning aspect. You can wish and will all you want that this goes to my daughter, this goes to my brother, this goes to my son, this goes to my spouse, if something were to happen to me. But if it's not actually written down and they don't have a legal entitlement to it, it's not going to get to them. And so they have to come into possession of something. And so that's really that transferring assets from one generation to the next. And so in this slide, I focus on some of the basics. Most of you already know how to protect your assets. Most of it is going to be through some sort of will or trust. That's on the family side. And on the business side, we also have to think about how can we protect our legacy in the business context. And so a lot of my work, as Stefan mentioned, is on the intellectual property protection. And that's where I think AI has a very strong influencing component that we have to start thinking about. When we're protecting our assets and we're protecting what it is that we own, you got to realize that, number one, to copyright something, this is just basic law, it needs to be created by an actual human. So if AI created something, that's not necessarily something that you can go to the US Patent and Trademark Office and, go to the Copyright Office and say, hey, I want to copyright this thing because you didn't create it. It's about original works of authorship, things that you created yourself. And so we have to be careful that particularly those of us that are in the creative space, we utilize AI to help us. We utilize AI as the asset that it is, but there's a fine line between using it as the asset and then having it create everything. And so I'm looking forward to talking more about some of these aspects and images that we're seeing now on the internet, particularly with photographs, these deep fakes. There's so much that's popping up that sometimes I see a picture and I don't even know whether or not this is a real picture or if this is AI. And I'm curious, actually, those of you on the call, how many of you have seen a picture and you question whether or not this is a real image or whether or not this is something that AI created? Yeah. So this is happening all of the time. And so I know from my perspective, it's a little scary because now I'm thinking I'm supposed to be protecting my legacy, particularly those of you who have children. How scary would it be to see a picture of your child doing something that doesn't make any sense, that you know doesn't fit, but your eyes are playing tricks on you, and it looks like that's your child. You believe that it's them, but you can't tell right away. And that's where the scary part starts to come in when we're thinking about where our data is being stored, who we're giving rights and access to our information, and how it is being used. You have to read the fine print. You have to pay attention to these agreements, the terms of service, these applications. Stefan and I have had conversations about this, and even particularly from a spiritual standpoint, if I put my picture in some application and now it takes it, it's distorting this image. And I know I was created in the image and likeness of God. So to me, that's also a distortion of God's image. And so I look at that, from my own personal perspective and say, that something about that just isn't right. So not to get, sidetracked, but there's a lot of different ways where AI, law, and this sort of aspect of protecting who you are and your legacy. The thing about legacy too is that we're passing things down, right, that we have ownership to. And so most people, when they're thinking about protecting themselves, protecting their assets, they're thinking about the basic stuff. This is what you would call your estate. So it's usually bank accounts, right? A house, a car, things that you have ownership of. These are things that you have access to, and now you want to give it to somebody else. And your goal to protect this is to say, well, I don't want someone else to take it. I want it to stay in my family. I want my brother to have it. I want my child to have it. Whoever in your family or maybe outside of your family, you want to have access to these things that you find valuable. And I think that's key. So when we're going into the AI stage, this is like the normal estate. Now we're talking about digital assets. We got to remember cryptocurrency. Okay. We've got NFTs now. There's a lot of different things that we have to start thinking about when it comes to protecting your assets in this sort of new day and age that we didn't have to think about before. You even have to think about your social media accounts. If somebody were to hack into your social media account, does somebody have access to your password? Do you have somebody designated to go into your accounts if you would no longer have access to them if something were to happen to you? These are things that you have to start thinking about, particularly if you're somebody. I heard somebody the other day, I don't know what happened, but Instagram did something where they changed their algorithm, and this was a particular person that had a lot of followers. Those followers are assets, right? Like they spent a lot of time to build up that following. And so now what would happen? Instagram at any point in time can just lock you out or say you don't have access to this anymore. And so I know that this is a little bit outside of the box, but you have to start thinking differently about what we actually think of in terms of legacy and how we protect it, particularly with AI and the new technology that we now have access to.
That's a wild thing you say, because that's like money.
Mm-hmm.
You built that up. You got this, bank account that is your people, and it got taken away. So is it Instagram or yours?
They're in oral, aren't they? I believe they're having oral. They just had oral arguments on that TikTok, whether they're getting banned. I have a best friend from college who's, I won't say her name. You could find her. She's one of the global head of TikTok compliance. And I messaged her and I said, this is, she said, this has been a long time coming. We've been working very hard on this, but there are real creators, and I believe they joined the lawsuit too, because they're making their living this way, right? And you cut that off, and that's a problem for a lot of people.
Interesting. Yeah. Aigné.
It is. So I'll breeze through this. I won't hold you guys, but I wanted you to think about before I kind of wrapped up my, my portion, and I really want to get Jared involved into this, but I want you to think about what are other ways where you can protect your legacy. There's so many different things that we have technical access to, but I want you to ask yourself about whether or not you have ownership of it, because that's what it comes down to in terms of the legal protections. If you don't have ownership of it, meaning if it is not yours, you can't protect it. And so that's the question that we have to start asking ourselves when we're using particularly these social media platforms, just like the example Jared gave, right? What do you have ownership of? What do you have a legal right to? Because if you don't have a legal right to it, you can't pass it down, and it can't be a part of your legacy necessarily, at least in that traditional sense, and it can't be passed down to your next generation. Now, one thing that I will say, as I stop sharing my screen, the idea of legacy and the idea of passing something down from one generation to the next, I also look at legacy as this idea that even if I don't technically physically have something or don't technically have ownership of it, if I put something out there, my name is attached to it, that's going to be a part of my legacy. So even if I don't own my social media accounts, or even if I don't own the rights to this song, this book, whatever it is, it's still something that I created. My name is attached to it. So I look at that as something that will live beyond my lifetime. And that's how I define legacy. So I'll pause there, and happy to see if anybody has any specific questions. But that idea of access and ownership, I think, is really important. So I'll turn it to you, Jared.
Can I just say one thing really quick, Jared?
Oh, go ahead.
It feels like a lot of this stuff we're talking about came out of them putting out ChatGPT. They trained that thing on all of our stuff. That's everybody's stuff. It's information. It got it from somewhere.
Not everybody's stuff.
They built this whole thing from stuff. That's the technical term, stuff.
Right.
They got it from people's thing. So anyway, Jared, go ahead.
So, I'll just say briefly, my name is Jared Jacobson. I'm an attorney. I've had a firm for 15 years as September. I won't say I've been practicing a little longer than that, but a lot of the work I do is employment, labor and employment, plaintiff side. A lot of the work is discrimination, retaliation work, various protected traits. And it's generally, I do some counseling for employers to try to avoid lawsuits. I generally won't defend them when they don't do what I suggest and they wind up getting sued. Maybe they have insurance, but so it's a handful over the years. But I'm generally representing plaintiffs in these cases, and so the crossover with the passion that I've had for AI and these conversations, and thank you, Stefan, for having me, and Black AI Think Tank. I mean, these are. You mentioned a second ago that they're training on all this stuff. Well, who's training it? What stuff is it? Traditionally, this is, from my perspective, a lot of these communities, including the Black community that's here a lot on this call, right? And it's not a joke. I am white, if you can see, right? But either way, so the point is, there are tons of people that are their data may be out there, it may not be, but it's being used in healthcare decisions. It's being used in tons of decisions, insurance, the banking and lending industry. You hear redlining. Just to make decisions that have, in the past, before AI, they had their own internal algorithms, and now it's just like on steroids, right? You can put circles around groups of people and choose not to lend to them. You can change social services and how much funders are going to give when you present them this data. And the problem with that is, if we're not monitoring, and people call this AI governance, right? AI bias, AI ethics, and I think it all kind of falls under AI and maybe you can say like AI governance, or how we're going to govern this, right? And companies, you think that they'd be somehow incentivized to watch how these models are being created, because some of them are creating their own models that sit on top of the large language models, right? So they're kind of, you can check certain boxes and you can upload your own data depending on the size of the company. They can use these for hiring and firing decisions. And who's challenging this? Who has access to that data to even challenge it? A judge are they going to award access to that in discovery? And so you file a lawsuit, and then, there's a complaint, an answer, then there's discovery. You're going to ask a company for how are you going to even know what to ask for if you're not in this area and you're not understanding these things? And they say that if you're not even paying attention to AI and how it's going to impact law, it's going to be in 5 years from now. That's kind of like malpractice. You couldn't be doing your job, right? So and then there's that additional hurdle, which there's always been, of educating a judge in these situations. Just like it is similar to legislators. They've been doing their jobs forever. They've been seeing the same people. They've been answering to the same people. In Pennsylvania, judges are elected. That's not changing. People like to get paid to give benefits to certain people, right? So I won't go off on a tangent, too much.
That's interesting. Judges are elected. That's how it is in North
Not in
Carolina.
federal court, but yeah, in state court they are, which is you pay to play. I mean, that's not a secret. But the problem is we're training these models with data that's been taken, knowingly, intentionally, or you're checking the box. As I honestly say, like, yeah, I consent. You're not using these apps. You're not allowed on the websites unless you're checking it out. For our children, like their friends are doing it. The parents are like, yeah, whatever. I'm busy. Like nobody's watching them. So who's teaching these kids, whether it's in school or at home? And the problem is AI is, as Stefan, like it's already involved. It's already, whether it's Siri, whether it's Alexa, and there was a lawsuit with them. And then people are afraid their jobs are going to disappear. And it's the white collar jobs that are actually, it seems like, are disappearing first. Lawyers are being replaced, but there is a place for human beings. And I think the first place for human beings is to manage this AI process and how they're being trained, how they're being supervised. Otherwise, it's gonna perpetuate what's already been taking place in real life. And you don't need to look further than the EEOC just released like an annual report, which they do yearly for 2023. I won't go and show you all the statistics, but when it comes to race discrimination claims that they're willing to file, they're not finding reasonable. They have the most amount of claims, the race and color claims, and they're finding the most amount of claims filed, and reasonable cause is found the least amount of time, and a no cause finding, meaning we don't find any discrimination here, is the most in terms of proportion and absolute numbers of people. And so now so is it the EEOC that's going to have a role? They're charged by the legislatures, right, to work out these discrimination claims. And that would be a natural fit, right, for overseeing parts of these companies or playing a role in how these companies are developing their LLMs.
Hey, Jared.
But is that what we want? Yeah, okay.
So I'm gonna say one thing about that. We've stayed away from politics the whole time. I know.
I didn't even mention anything about politics.
I know, but you started talking about EEOC, and all this stuff could change in 50 days. So anyway, that's out there. But keep on going, Jared. Let's keep staying away from that.
Well, no, I mean, I don't think it's directed necessarily from the top. These are lifers. They've been there through administrations changing over. You can go back 10, 15 years and look at the data. It actually hasn't really changed very much. Mm-hmm. That's a human thing. And that human thing is now going to be entered into the AI. And with this new model, at least with ChatGPT, it's now thinking for itself. Based on what?
Okay, so you make something. All of us, a lot of us on this call, we make something. We created it. Yeah, everybody's using AI. You can't even do anything on Google, whatever. It's involved ubiquitously. So we create it and we put it on the blockchain. So
that's what you mentioned. Is that what you mentioned? Is that proof? And I put that in the chat. That's not proof. It's not protecting it, because as Anna absolutely said, the law right now is it only addresses humans with their creations to be able to get that protection. Just because there weren't non-humans creating it, I would imagine, right? So there needs to be legislation there with this, but it's not protected, at least in terms of copyrights. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm just saying, what in the world can we create nowadays that doesn't have something AI touching it in some ways? Tell me.
There's AI involved in this call.
Yeah, I know. So I guess it's the amount of AI or something. I don't know.
I think it matters what's important to answer that question, I don't think there won't be too many things touched by AI going forward, because I think it's from a business and efficiency perspective, it just makes sense. Anyone that can, whether it's an agent doing your tasks or, I use AI for, checking research that I get back from somebody, but if you know, and you look it up and you know what the law is, it is clear that you will get an answer. It is people pleasing and it is not accurate very often. It's not, but most people wouldn't know that, at least when it comes to legal questions. But other things I think it could be extremely, can be very valuable to people. I use it for proposals to clients because it's writing in a way, it's in validation. There's no one else, maybe, I have some people that I work with, team up with, but it's some validation, right? This is what I would propose, just in my own speak, whatever you might call that. And this is what I want to do for newsletters, for example. This is what I want to send it out. And I want to repurpose it as a LinkedIn article. Go. But I'll just sit there and just give it tons and tons and tons of qualifications and conditions. And it sometimes might say to me, well, why don't you just do it yourself? It doesn't say that, actually. But it's helpful for that, demands and correspondence with other attorneys. I've used it in communications with personal relationships. But in terms of protection, the more you put out there, it's learning as we go. And from my perspective is who's teaching it and what is it being taught and who's involved in that process. And that becomes a problem. Putting aside the EEOC, that we can put aside anything we want, but the problems that we have now from the work that I've been doing with impact litigation, it's going to perpetuate.
Yeah,
it can't not, because it is involved in everything.
I'm
curious what Aigné thinks about that. I'm sorry, again.
Aigné. Oh yeah, who was talking?
Aigné.
No, that's okay. And I didn't know if anybody else wanted to comment on that. I was following the chat and I saw some questions around copyrights. And when I did the presentation the last time, I think because some of the stuff that Jared is bringing up, I mean, it's important to think about, like, what rights do we really have? So I put in the chat that there was this sort of blueprint that the White House came out with in 2022 regarding a sort of AI Bill of Rights, if you will. And so I put some of those aspects on a slide so that you guys could see them. Is it coming up?
That's great.
See it? Okay. So think about, like, okay, if you have rights for everything else, you should have rights when it comes to AI, because we're still in this stage where sometimes we're not even sure if AI is even being used, but I would argue it's pretty much being used everywhere. And unless you're just maybe in the space, there may be many times where it's not even being detected. And so what rights do we have to know when AI is being used, particularly when it comes to our data? So one of the things it talks about is a right, obviously, to a safe and effective systems. You don't want to be involved in a system that doesn't make you feel safe, or, causing certain harms, things like that. That's where some of the bias comes in. So there's supposed to be protections against discrimination when these algorithms are being used. So Jared's talking about, okay, who's programming them? There's bias in everything. I saw Teresa in the chat said that there's still bias in these new latest models and versions. And so these systems and processes can only be as good as the humans that are actually putting them in implementation. And so if there's still bias in our world, which there is, I do a lot of diversity consulting. I know Jared talks a lot about that as well. I usually focus specifically on the legal industry and in hiring aspects, particularly for the culture of a firm or an organization. None of that ever changes if you don't change the people that are in charge. So how does that work? How does that fit in? Protecting against abusive data practices. I think that's important for us to focus on and realize that as well. How is our personal data and information being used? Okay, we have to know this. Do we have the right to know when an automated system is being used? So if you go to a website and you're communicating with a chatbot, are you supposed to know that? Should you know that? Some of those chatbots are very interactive and you don't know if you're talking to a real person or not. You need to know when you're being recorded. Is that information now going to be utilized in the future? There's a lot of things that we have to think about. And then I think the most important of this is the right to opt out. I think the most important freedom that we should have in this country when it comes to anything is the right to say no. No, no, no. And the way that our iPhones now, other technology, there's so much that's integrated in it. yeah, you may be saying yes, but how much of a choice do you really have to opt out when there's so many things that are automatically defaulted to say yes? So I just wanted to kind of put that out there because I think, these are important issues. And I wanted to address a couple questions that Teresa brought up, and then I'll open it back up. But she did talk about how copyright law may be impacted with AI in the future, and whether or not a book or something that was generated by AI could be written, could be copyrighted. And according to the law and what the Copyright Office is saying is that no. So the only way you can utilize, or I would say should utilize, AI written content for a book, something that you copyright as your own. Remember, it's about original work of authorship. So there would have had to be, I think their standard is something about significant human involvement. So one of the things that I've done in the past is I give talks. I talk enough. I will record my talk, and then I will use Otter AI to transcribe it or something else, and I will download that transcript. Then I will take the transcript and I will put it in an AI software to say, summarize this, organize this into a chapter, things like that. That's significant human involvement because it's taking my words. It's not the other way around. And oftentimes it rewrites it in such a way that I don't like it anyway, so I end up redoing it. But it at least gives me a starting place and saves me time. So just wanted to answer that question and put that out there. I see a few more things coming in the chat, but I'll pause for now.
That's great. That's instructive of what other people could do too. Right? It's great. I think the challenge is people don't understand what they're opting in and opting out of. They don't know the consequences of it. And I think this needs to be kind of built into education from a very, because they're capable of it, understanding these things more than a lot of adults, and they're willing. They don't have those same blocks, right? They need to be primed to be open to these concepts. It's not like one or the other. We're humans and sentient. We're conscious. We're conscious, and these, artificial intelligence is not. It's becoming a combination. And the problem with the deep fakes is it's not just images, it's information, and it's the data. Besides putting aside where they get the data from, what data is left out, whether it's intentional or not. But I think from an early age, the next generation, they get these things. And I know, Stefan, you've done these trainings with children and their parents in real life, and it's taking it offline. You show people that have not done it, they're not aware of it. Like, yeah. Do I take it to my friends and family? They're like, Jared, come on, seriously, we don't care. I'm busy. I don't care about this. But there are people that do care, right? And kids are interested. And then the parents are more open to it. And then it's a bonding mechanism between them and their kids. And it's great. They can write children's books.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. And I've heard
that.
Children, yeah. I've heard of some children using it, parents supervision, and actually being real productive. Hey, y'all, when you were talking about who actually owns some things and our rights and then protecting that right now, I heard it's one of our leading philosophers, futurists in the AI area. He's very high in it, and he's quoted by Elon Musk and Bill Gates and stuff. But he actually was telling a group of people, make sure you take note of what you're creating now. Save all of your stuff, because in the near future, you'll need to prove and show that that's yours. And he uses this term, rights, that there'll be some type of rights for AI being protected. So make sure you get all that stuff written down here. And he used the word compensation in his talk. And it just sounded, man, it sounded like reparations. And it sounded like a white person telling, and I told him this too, a lot of white people, protect your stuff right now. And it was reparations all over again for the future, and yet for white people as they create AI. So the protection is good. I see the argument of that. It's just the way it came sounding, it was like, hey, let's jump all the way over reparations and let's jump into compensation for AI creators.
That's good, Stefan. And it's interesting. I mean, hey, I feel like we all have something that we should be compensated for, and particularly when there's just so much that is available at our fingertips at any point in time. I mean, people are resharing, retweeting. I mean, sometimes it is hard to know, where did this start? what was the inception? And so saving it, and or at least having record of it. One of the things, if anybody has ever filed a trademark, and the biggest thing that I tell my clients to do is you need to create a digital footprint of your business, of your brand, very early on. And so especially if somebody else is doing something similar, or there may be a possibility where somebody can try to block your trademark, you have to show that you have used it for the purposes of your brand. And so get your handles on social media, make sure you're posting it, use the hashtags, and you have to show proof. There's something called a statement of use that must be submitted whenever you submit your trademark application. So how is it being used? How are you using your brand, your name, your whatever it is? You have to show proof of that. And I think it's actually a really good idea to keep track of it and have copies, because at any point in time, these platforms can take it down. I mean, the short of it is the content that you post is owned by you because you created the content. I think the question for me is that yours? Did you actually come up with it? Was this something that you heard from somewhere else, Stefan? And I'm sure some of you know how, these digital companies, organizations, I'm thinking like Clubhouse, right? When someone's on these apps and someone says something, sometimes you don't remember where you heard it. You heard it. You don't know who said it. You're not sure, but someone said it, and now you heard it, and now you're going to go share it somewhere else, and someone else thinks you owned it and you said it first, but actually so-and-so said it first. So,
then you just deny it. If nobody likes what you said, then you just lie and deny it, apparently.
Right. No, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. But these are things that you have to start thinking about. But I really think someone used the term recently that I really liked, and I don't know if it's properly used, but I think there's an idea of a digital currency. When people look you up, see who you are, what is your digital currency, right? What is your digital footprint, blueprint? Like what do people see when they see you? And I really think that is something we need to start thinking about, because some of us have, quote, higher digital currency than others based off of our Instagram followers or how many people are engaging in our posts, whereas other people do not, but that's worth something.
That's good.
May I ask a question? Aigné, do you, when you counsel clients to create these digital footprints, do you, and I don't know if they're able to do this, if you're doing it for them, you third party, in terms of putting stuff on the blockchain, and that's not going to maybe address like the first to use in commerce for like a trademark, where you got to show people say, oh, I offered it to sell. That just means I'm trying, and I think that counts. I might be wrong. I'm not sure. I don't do a ton of. I'm pretty light on the IP. But do you counsel clients to somehow, besides just collecting it and keeping it, whether it's backing up in a cloud, which could be taken, is at a risk? Because I feel like these LLMs are looking for data anywhere to scrape, right? They're buying companies that were not who you consented to, but now the companies they're buying have access to that data. So are you, counseling clients to really dig in on, or to use the blockchain, and are they capable of doing those things?
Yeah, and a lot of the clients that I counsel are in this sort of middle age, older age. I do have some younger clients that are more, I would say, savvy when it comes to, some of that aspects, but I think it's something that we have to start thinking about, and I may start doing a bit more of, because you honestly just don't know. And there's so many ways. I think the concept of protection can mean something different for different people. And so that's one thing that I would say to maybe ask yourself, what does protection mean to you? What makes you feel safe? What would make you feel safe and comfortable? To some extent, some people don't mind that somebody else has access to things that they created, so long as it's clear that they created it. And other aspects, some people don't, right? So you have to start thinking about, what does that actual protection mean? And so that's usually my focus on what is it that the clients want. And they're usually pretty laser focused, right? They want to get this trademark because they want to make sure that it's associated with them, their brand, and their business. So they do that, but maybe there's other aspects that they need to consider as well.
Where money comes into it, and often it does, people fight for, ownership. They're like, hold up, no, especially if it's big money. And nowadays, it seems like AI is smart enough to look, I kind of taught it in this earlier class, look at a piece of art you really like, use AI to help make you like that artist. But, you know, there's probably 100 of them. So you can take an idea and become like that and create your own stuff. So a friend actually said to me, what is privacy? You know, what is this? Because it seems like all the stuff we create is just out there, and protecting it, you know, I don't know how, you know, it seems like, are we beyond protecting ourselves?
It's a good question. I often think about it too. I think I'm at the point where I realize to some extent that protection or privacy really just isn't there. But I think there are things that can be done to make sure that how someone has access to you and vice versa is being done. I don't know. It's a really good question. I think at some point we'll probably get to the stage where everyone is going to know where everyone is at every point in time, or I don't know. It's just we're so far gone from when I first, got on the internet with the dial up and AOL and chat rooms. And I just look at like this is where my life is now. And I really see, for my kids and as these next generations go forward, it's only just going to become that much more accessible. And then that, and I think that's just the scary part of protecting yourself when people have a lot of access to you, and really, really protecting that right to opt out. If I got anything out of these last few years of learning more of, this technology and AI and how some of this stuff is being utilized, it's that opt out. And there are laws that require that you have people opt out. That's actually one of the things that a lot of companies and small businesses, if they don't have things set up right, you can't set up something on your website and say, oh, I want to get your email address and your phone number, and you don't provide people an opportunity to opt out of being on your email list. You can get in a lot of trouble with that stuff. And so be careful. I'm not going to, give any legal advice, but those are some of those small things that I see businesses get dinged for often, and can easily get in trouble for if they don't have some of that stuff set up, particularly when it comes to their websites and how they are getting access to people's information and how it's being used. So
We should
these
all know that.
companies are doing a better job of protecting that, but it's something to consider. Go ahead, Stefan.
That's practical information for all of us, because a lot of us got websites, we got initiatives, businesses and organizations. We have to provide, say it again, Aigné, an opt out if we're going to be taking emails. Is that simple? And I guess you're saying we need to know that, right?
It's a very important thing. And if you utilize like CRM systems and things like that, many of them, they should, depends on the company, but they're very strict. They will not let you sign up for their system if you utilize a text company that sends out mass text messages for you, and you have like a phone number, things like that. They will not let you send out messages if you don't have something on your website that says very specifically how you were collecting the data, why you were collecting it, and providing them an opportunity to opt out.
So you create a image of yourself. It's an avatar. It talks like you, a deep fake, and it's very good. And it's a video. Somehow you get that video to do something that's not wrong, that harms somebody else. Do you think we're going to come to a place where AI is the one doing it and not the person?
Did you say you did something, or maybe somebody
No.
else took it?
No,
Maybe they took the
people come
voice
into
out
that
of it in
place.
3 seconds. What is it, 11 seconds or what? 11 labs, one of them.
Yeah,
How long do you need to pull someone's voice? Maybe someone else could take it.
Man, it's like 5 minutes. Oprah did it on her special a week ago. She did it with one of these popular influencers. She said a phrase, it came out in his voice. Crazy.
I think we're going to get to the point, we're going to get to the point where there's going to be questions. And this is how any legal case is too. You always have to be able to prove your case. right? But we're going to get to the point where it's going to get to the nitty gritty. I'm curious, Jared, if you had any litigation on, any software systems development, things like that, with the bias aspect, right? Can you sue? Who's the person, I guess, that's responsible for the issue or the bias? So is it
There
the
are no
company?
laws.
Is it the algorithm, right? Is it the person that who is the one that right? There's so much that goes into it. Who's responsible when that happens?
It would be a terms of service, a contractual issue, which has a longer statute of limitations, usually like 4 to 6 years, depending on where you are. But in any lawsuit, as you know, there has to be a law that you're alleging. There's two parts to any case. There's liability and there are damages, right? And the liability means you're alleging that there was a law broken. It could be a contract, it could be a statute, federal statute, state, whatever, local. But right now, we don't have these laws that we can allege. So we're kind of they're rolling out slowly, right? And I think, as you said, Stefan, you were up on the Hill. I don't know if it was in DC, but
It was John Passmore. That's who it was. He was
okay.
talking about it. No, that they had some sessions talking about bias. He said the word black never came up and there was no black person in it.
What were they talking about then?
Patty, you remember they were talking about bias. It was a session on this, and he was surprised that even people he thought might speak up for us weren't. So, yeah. So anyway.
Are you aware of any Congress people that are listening and have the ear? Because there are a number of issues that people are focusing on with AI, right? We've spoken about a number of them, whether it's protecting property, whether it's passing it on and protecting it the right way, whether it's how these systems are being trained, who's included, who's excluded, where the data is coming from, whether it's being taken, whether you're aware of it or not, whether it's happening in your home, on the go, on your phone, it's being sold. But it's a question of, I think, how our society is going to choose to prioritize all of these issues, because it's going so quickly, as this conversation started, right? It's going so quickly, and they're all extremely important. They're all extremely important. They're all alarms. And I think they all need to be addressed. There need to be contingencies and groups that are pushing these things. And it may be they can have some bills that are all encompassing, right? And they're not just pork because someone paid someone to get it into a bill. I'm not saying any political sides one way or the other. I know we're staying away from that. What I'm saying is, I think these things can be addressed altogether.
Yeah, I mean, I think Black AI think tank has power, and I'm interested in what are some of, and I see them because I'm stepping into some of them now. But the power of the group collective of our thought and who we represent, I think there's a lot in that that can do some good for sure. I was going to say one other thing. If I just forgot, sorry.
Does anybody have any questions that's been listening? I see the chat's pretty engaging, but if anyone wanted to maybe come off of mute and comment, or if you have a question before we get too close to the end of the hour, I did want to make sure we had an opportunity for that.
If nobody speaks up real quick, and you talk over me if you have a question, I want you to go. But Blackstone bought Ancestry.com. And Blackstone is signing a deal right now worth $30 billion with Microsoft. So everybody who's got our DNA stuff out with Ancestry, now a massive corporation owns that very personal information, Blackstone. And now they're getting, in bed with yeah, it goes a long way. So
I think that's very concerning. Years ago, I interviewed the founder of the Sorensen Molecular Foundation. And he had people on the ground getting DNA samples of tribes in Africa, along with at least 7 generations of their genealogy. And I participated in one of the early studies and was linked directly to a family in Mali whose family history went back to the 1600s that the Sorensen Molecular Foundation provided. And when I interviewed him, he said that Ancestry.com bought his database, but they're not using it. And I said, well, why would they want all of the data of the DNA combined with the genealogical reports, and not utilize that, because that's one of the most powerful things. Okay, you got the DNA, it tells you you're part this, part that, but it doesn't tell you what tribe you're from, you know. But the Sorensen Molecular Foundation did tell you those things. It was the only organization that got that data and matched the two together. So I'm sorry to go off on a tangent, but they have for years been strategically buying out companies to amass a large amount of genetic data, and with the computing power, being able to use AI to synthesize large amounts of data like that, that is very dangerous for a society. And I don't think that it should be in the hands of private corporations without public commentary or watching. It's just really
Honestly,
scary.
Teresa, what does public commentary mean? Honestly, when we say that, I mean, it seems like it's so strong. What could we possibly do about Black Summon? You know, it's
Well, they can't just run amok and do shit unchecked, in my opinion. I don't think that's right. Like, we have to have some type of inclusion as stakeholders in the paths that they're taking and what they're doing, because this impacts humanity and gives them way too much power. It's like they're the genies, they're the holders of the genie in the bottle with this technology and information.
And especially with Microsoft in there, that's wow. And Microsoft's OpenAI, you know, they're tied together. So our genealogy, all that stuff is, look how that little, it leads back to OpenAI having something to do with, we're going to
Why
start.
not guardrails, Stefan? Guardrails is what I'm hearing. Like some transparency and the ability to provide comments. Like there are comment periods for these types of laws. Nobody cares. No one's listening. Let's be honest. But there need to be people in power that actually care.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, interesting.
Was it Andrea? You had your hand raised a couple times if you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I'm not sure if everybody knows my background, but I do federal policy, regulatory, and legislative policy. So I do follow the hearings, and one of the hearings I usually follow is in the AI area. And I can't remember a time that there has been a witness that was a person of color yet. And that's probably one of the reasons why I ended up creating my nonprofit, because of the lack of representation. There are some bills out there that is trying to cover those issues that you're talking about, of the data being expanded beyond HIPAA and being able to identify people and people being able to opt out. Because if you transfer, I'm particularly in the healthcare area, if you transfer our information to a company like Google or someone like that, that data isn't necessarily covered right now, and they're trying to expand that coverage, that you can't identify the people based on that data. So there is bills and things out there. I think Jared mentioned that there's a comment period on that most of the time with regulations, but usually it's the big associations and organizations that comment on that. One of the issues I have is that the people who are creating these things, the Microsofts, the Apples, and Googles, are usually the ones that are the witnesses and the ones that are involved in making these legislation and regulations. So we need to have someone, organizations, coalitions, alliances, to start speaking up and getting represented on these different events that are happening. And as you mentioned, Stefan, a Black AI think tank could be one of those. So we have to do those things together. But I know Senator Cory Booker as someone who's had things in the past, and there's other senators and Congress people who have AI bills that are currently out there. They're probably not going to move until next year, but there are definitely things that are going on. I just wanted to give that quick update.
It's good.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I was just asking AI, where is the case at with New York Times saying that OpenAI, y'all trained on a bunch of our stuff, and it's basically it's in a holding time right now. Both have to produce things, and somebody's be interesting to see where that goes because OpenAI use a lot of people's stuff. It's just that New York Times caught it and they can prove it.
Okay, so we're almost up on our time. If there are no more questions, then Stefan, do you want to close
Yeah,
us out or have Hassan close us out? Because we have another session at 7:30.
yeah.
We can take a little break.
If y'all don't know, Hassan has he has a perfect closeout for these rooms, and I'm glad you're back in here to do that for this room. So, Aigné and Jared, thank you for this. It's really insightful for us to think about, and we know how to contact both of you now. Jared, I saw you put your thing there, and we know we can get you on LinkedIn. And Aigné, I'm glad you got your business up there and the work you're doing. But thanks for taking time to do this, to get free time with some attorneys. That's actually a pretty cool thing. So
Thank you so much for having me. And it's great to meet everyone. And Aigné, I appreciate everything you said. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Same here.
yeah, it's been great. Okay, Hassan, he says he's not on the mic today. Got it, not a problem.
I love how he says that is like a polite way of saying no.
I know.
He was in the chat. He's on the chat. I saw that. And thank you, Patty, too.
Yeah, okay. Well, listen, it's been beautiful, y'all. We have 2 more sessions left. The next one is on who's leading this stuff into the future, leadership, and Dr. Philip Eklund is going to be here, as well as Njiri is her name. She's doing some amazing stuff for Black leadership and AI. And then after that, we'll just hang out for a little while from 7 till 9. And we're going to announce all of our winners of the Black AI Think Tank Awards, which will be pretty cool. All right, that's it. And with that, sorry, I don't have a great countdown, but this room will end in 5, 4, 3. Hey,